Okay, well, there's not going to be any music. We're just going to go through the slides. Okay, well, thank you everybody for bearing with me. I have no idea what my technical problem is. Again, if you're just joining, please go to the bottom of your screen, click on the interpretation, the world symbol, and click either English or Spanish. The handouts for today are up on our website at txp2p.org. It's on the right-hand side. And Carolyn, I'm going to kick it over to you.
Okay. I think I've even unmuted myself. So, all right. Hi, guys. My name's Carolyn Nelson, and I see all of your names and just a couple of faces. If y'all wouldn't mind, if this is not the time, don't worry about it. But if you wouldn't mind just waving through video, just so I can see some faces just at the beginning. There we go. Now we have some people. This is important to me because I know you guys are all real people out there. And so I want to make sure that we all get to just give a quick wave and a grin. And of course, you can spend your time in this workshop in any, you can shut your video back off if you want to, but thank you for saying hi. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and then we can keep going from there. Okay. Oh, now I have lost my Zoom screen. Sorry, guys. Screen sharing has failed to start.
The struggle is real.
Mm-hmm.
The struggle is real.
Okay, let's just try it again.
It's a good thing we have a lot of patient people. Mm-hmm. Thank you, everybody, for being so patient.
Zoom is different every day, every meeting. All right, let's try again. Oh, actually, sorry, guys. Okay, so now my presentation has gone somewhere. All right. Cindy, if you have announcements that you want to make, you go right ahead. For some reason.
Okay.
Oh.
I've got some announcements to make.
Okay.
Did you get it?
I did. Can you guys see it?
No.
You cannot. Okay.
Okay, so I'm going to continue on with my announcements. We will be continuing our speaker series through the end of September. All of the information to register is up on our website, so go to our website. In October, the first two weeks in October, the Tuesdays and Thursdays, we'll be kicking off our Pathways to Adulthood Transition Zoom series again. So if you're interested in those, the registration is also open on our website as well. So yeah, we're glad you guys are all here.
Need help?
I am having to reconvert it into a PowerPoint file. I'm so sorry, guys.
Oh, please.
It's something happened with the first screen share that wanted to shut down my original presentation. All right. Okay, let's try it again. Okay, how about now? Can you all see a screen?
Yes.
Okay.
Yay!
All right. Let's get it ready to go. Okay. All right. So we're here to talk about, we're going to spend about the next hour talking about navigating virtual and hybrid instruction, you know, and what does that mean for special ed in particular. And so this is how we're going to spend our time. So we're going to start with just some brief introductions, then I'm going to let you know what I'm hoping that you guys leave with at the end of the hour, right? So you'll see that on any slide, if you see that little green star, if you leave with nothing else from that slide, pay attention to the green star information, because that is, if you walk away with that, you know, at the end of the session, then that will help you along the way without, you know, having to be embedded in a bunch of details. We're going to start actually by talking about some background information, even pre-COVID, that then led us into pandemic and crisis response on the part of the schools, and sort of, you know, how the trajectory has played out between March and now, because it's been so dynamic that has all played into how services are being delivered now, how schools are communicating with parents now, and sort of what the forecast for going forward looks like. Then we are going to go through the 5 R's, and those are basically 5 different types of things to bear in mind that together will keep parents moving, you know, in the right direction in terms of surviving special ed at home, and also not, you know, being able to recover as quickly as possible once we finally are eventually back to something that looks and feels like the rhythm of a regular school day and school year. And then I want to leave some time for questions and answers at the end. In the meantime, if you have a question in the moment, if you could please put it into the chat, and Cindy, I'm just going to ask you to keep an eye on that chat. And if we are, if you can help me by keeping an eye on the chat and the time, and if we're doing great on time and you want to throw that question to me right away, we can handle that right in the moment. And if not, maybe we'll just hold those chat questions to the end, and then we'll just take them in order. Does that work, Cindy?
Yes, and you have until between 3:30 and 3:40. No, what time? 1:30, 2:30. You have until like 2.
Until
No.
3. Yeah, 3 is our.
You never mind. You've got this.
I've got it. I've got it. Okay. All right. So introductions. So my name's Carolyn Nelson. I am an attorney. I practice special ed law. My firm does dispute resolution in special education with the idea that parents and schools need to be working together throughout that dispute resolution process, even when it's really adversarial, even when maybe we're dealing with live legal issues, because if a team, which of course includes the family, if a team can get through that special ed dispute without having to go to due process and actually go through the litigation process of a lawsuit, what's going to happen in the end is they have the best chance of returning once it's all over back to that school district, sitting down again with those same professionals to talk about the next year in school with their working relationships intact. And what I know about legal processes and litigation is that it's really hard on the relationships. It's hard in so many ways. It's hard financially, it's hard emotionally, and it's really hard for parents and school professionals who have been through a lawsuit against each other to finally come back and really be able to sit down and, talk about 8th grade when, they got into that adversarial a process over 7th grade. And my guiding principle on that is the child, right? Because the fancier the process becomes, the longer it takes, the more we have outside decision makers making decisions about that child, the farther away all of that gets from the kid and his or her actual needs in school, which are probably needing to be addressed right now. So that's sort of my perspective on dispute resolution in special education. Within that, I do represent parents, who are advocating and needing to break some ground for their kid. I work with schools on training and consulting. I also do strategic planning with families of children with special needs, looking to the future and, wanting to think about all the things that they're going to need to be thinking about along the way, but maybe they don't even know what that stuff is yet. And I also do some work helping divorced or divorcing couples with a child with special needs, make sure that they're building enough of those, specialized elements into their co-parenting plan so that they're not stuck later, confronting issues that are complex and complicated, having not planned for, how to continue working together through that. I have arrived at this place. This is it's not the end, it's the end today. After a long path that had me starting as a high school teacher way back when, moved from there to law practice, having nothing to do with education. I then had kids. So I had a long stay-at-home mom period where I was at home raising kids. One of my 3 unfolded with pretty significant disabilities. And so growing up, that's where I learned special ed. It was as a mom, at the ARD table. And we have since navigated specialized medical services and psychological services. We've done agencies. We've gone through transfer of rights. He's now 24, which I can't believe that number. But he's now 24, so he is a young man living in his own place and getting around town using public transportation and, still working on his education and developing job skills and growing in independence. So that's how I, ended up here, had kids, was at home, learned special ed during that period of time. I came back to work after that period, back to public education, where I served as in special ed administration, doing child find, transition, and family services. And when my son finally graduated from transition services at 22, I like to say that I graduated when he graduated. Once he was done with public school and I didn't need to be there with him, I left public education again to return again to law practice. And so now I have my firm, and I'm continuing to work on working with families of kids with special needs, navigating, life basically. So that's me. We've talked about the rest, so we are going to start. Okay. So the background, the main thing in our background is that IDEA, the special ed law, never contemplated COVID. And in fact, all of the laws surrounding public education and different types of emergencies and different types of crisis responses, none of it has built in a provision that, would deal with a crisis like a pandemic. So, and the way it started for us is, of course, in March and April, we all, really scrambled. That was such a fast period of time where we were 1 minute thinking about spring break and the next minute maybe not going on spring break or going on spring break, and then that became, the eternal time at home. All of that moved really fast. And at that stage, the main priority that the schools had was we need to get back after spring break as soon as we can. Almost everybody extended their break time. Their priority was, we've got to get back as soon as we can. We have to get kids not back in school because they knew they had to have buildings closed, but they had to have instructional services begin to flow again for everybody, right? So their first priority was the global population in schools. They weren't thinking initially about all of the different subpopulations, including kids with disabilities within the school. Their first priority was just, we can't open physical doors. We have to get educational services going again. How are we going to do that? Of course, in the disability community, as soon as we passed that first week that was supposed to be the spring break that we all planned for, we all began experiencing what discrimination law refers to as the disparate impact of, what was happening with respect to the pandemic on specialty issues that families with loved ones with disabilities experience, 10 times worse. So all parents of all kids were, all of a sudden, everybody is at home. We have kids who are needing to do schoolwork together. We have parents who are maybe working from home, or we have parents who still have jobs in the community and they still have to go out to those jobs. But now there's no school. So if school functioned as childcare, how were those kids who needed to be at home going to be taken care of? At the same time, we were all, plunged into instant stress over the virus and not knowing how to deal with that, or how we were supposed to deal with it, or how dangerous it was going to be. So that was sort of everybody's experience, but families with disabilities from the beginning began experiencing that extra impact of all the different issues, right? Because if we have a family, with a child with special needs, and the ability to go to work is that much more important, or the ability to get some respite is that much more important, or that particular child doesn't understand why we're not getting up and getting on the school bus and, going through a daily routine that involves getting out of the house anymore. All of those hardships from the beginning just started piling up more in our community. So we started off thinking, okay, the news was telling us and the guidance was telling us it's not going to be a 1 week spring break anymore. It's probably 4 weeks or maybe 6 weeks. And, as we continued getting through the spring, it became apparent that no, we were actually going to finish up the 2019-2020 school year doing, remote instruction and work from home or essential workers trying to get out, that whole puzzle of how do we do pandemic under different versions of lockdown. We just knew it took us a while, but we knew midway through that we were actually going to finish the school year that way. From there, of course, the summer came, and we did have that little, that bump closer to the beginning of the summer where, like all summers, it seemed long and there was time, and maybe, on the science side, we would be able to make progress, and with good weather and people being able to be outside, we would be able to, target a reopening of school here in the fall that seemed a little closer to normal. But as it turned out, school opening this year has still been heavily influenced by, active public health concerns that continue to shift, but we had guidance from TEA just even 3 and 2 and a week out from the start of school this year that was changing flexibilities that it was offering to the schools around how many weeks they could have of starting remote, but then having to start bringing kids back versus beginning to create application and waiver mechanisms for the schools to be able to apply for waivers to either stay remote longer or open in a different fashion than what was prescribed. And so that initial crisis and scramble mode from March and April has still really been more a part of the educational scene than we anticipated in the spring and even in the summer. I think a lot of educators and other community members thought that things would be somewhat calmer at this point. So I give all of this rundown, and I know you have all lived through it the same way I have, and so all of this, but I think it's important to sort of paint that picture of where we've been the last 6 months, because it really bears on a lot of issues that are important to how we navigate challenges with our kids at school now, because it bears on our energy level and our bandwidth to keep trying something new or to keep troubleshooting the technology that suddenly won't turn on even though we think we know how to do it, like all of it. So living in that constant up and down between, okay, we think we're stabilizing a little bit, and then actually no, there's a new uncertainty or an extended uncertainty. All of that really takes a toll on everybody in the equation, whether it's the kids who are not having traditional school or the parents who are trying to just run that whole show, or the educators who are trying to do their jobs, and they are also parents at home with their own families running their own show, having all the same dilemmas. So the main thing on that backdrop is that with all of that, there is no legal blueprint for how to navigate this. So as I said earlier, IDEA, the special ed law, doesn't have anything that contemplates, what happens in this kind of a change in format to IEPs and to student rights and to services that kids with disabilities need and are guaranteed by their IEPs. So schools and the public health community do have a relationship, and so they do a lot of things in tandem, like in school when we get that letter saying that there have been so many cases of strep throat in your child's class, and so we want you to be aware, or the regulations about vaccinations, all of that, like there is some integration between public health and schools, but it doesn't extend to this kind of an ongoing crisis. The other thing is schools do contemplate, and the legal structure around them does account for more temporary or shorter term crises. So if there's a hurricane that comes through and schools have to close for a couple of weeks, or sometimes if there's enough of if enough of a school population has the flu, there are provisions for actually closing the school down for a few days to get their numbers down in order to reopen. And so those temporary types of plans exist. But the thing that's so different about where we are today for special ed is that all of those temporary emergency crisis plans for school closures that are short, relatively short, is that those closures sort of assume that, okay, this is going to be a blip, everybody's going to stay out, and then we're all going to come back together and it's going to be normal again. And so we will have experienced a blip, and this includes kids with disabilities, but we can recover from that because it's short and we have all of our infrastructure intact as soon as we're able to return. And so what's different here, of course, there are so many things different. I mean, most notably the length of this time out of normal. But then other things that are specific to pandemic, and that is our ability to have people gathering together in groups as opposed to having to isolate and be separate from one another. The role of mistakes in this format is very different from the role of mistakes in a shorter crisis. So, for example, if when Hurricane Harvey came through and so much of the Houston area had to really shut down and work hard, in some cases in a really extended way, to come back, that was still, there are always mistakes made in situations like this, but the role of a mistake when we have the resilience to be able to come back fairly quickly is that the mistake is in the past, and we use that as material to learn for next time. In this case, there are mistakes that are being made in all domains that are not mistakes in the past, because the mistakes are now impacting our next set of decisions about continuing to navigate crisis mode. And so not only are we navigating crisis mode, living in this really strange and stressful now long-term situation, but mistakes are being made, which is natural and normal, and we're having to do that additional learning while still in that pressure situation. And that changes a lot for us as parents and also for our educational teams. And then, of course, the last thing that's so different about this is, that the crisis planning that schools do plan for are local crises. So if something terrible happens in one community to one high school or to one region because of a storm or whatever, the surrounding regions, it's assumed, are intact and up and running. They can lend resources, and we don't have neighbors to depend on either, because all of our neighbors are experiencing the same things that we are. So all of this is a more detailed way of saying what we say every day, which is this is so unprecedented. But what that really means is we're having to learn and try and experiment right here in the middle of it. And you know, whether it's schools or parents or employers, all of us. And that really changes how effective we are, how tired we get. You know, it's an entirely different scene. Okay, and there we go. Okay, so the 5 R's. The first R is rules, and the short wisdom on that is know them. Okay, and that is what we always say about special education, is know the law. And what that really means is not just know your rights and your child's rights, but also what the school's responsibilities are and how those two concepts, the rights and the responsibilities, sort of dance together. And in addition, you know, we always want people to know what their rights are not and how far the school can go before it's okay for it to stop innovating or stop adding services or approaches or whatever. So the bottom line on the rules, and we're not going to get into this in this session, we're not going to get into what they are in this session, but basically everything is unchanged, right? So everything that you knew about special ed, rights, responsibilities, obligations, roles, processes, all of it remains unchanged. So there have been some things happening throughout the spring and summer around, obviously kids are getting different types of services and reduced services during remote instruction, and the schools have been notifying parents by sending letters about, you know, alternate service plans and things like that. That has led people to wonder if the rules are changing, right? Like, oh, now they can change my child's IEP, or now they don't have to address, you know, these 3 things that were in the in-person IEP, but we're not working on them now that we're doing remote instruction. And there are changes to the way things are happening, but there are no changes right now to the rules about what is supposed to be happening or how it is supposed to be happening. So this includes everything from the beginning, child find, evaluation, all the way through IEP development, how it's implemented, how progress is monitored and shared with parents. What is FAPE, that is like what is legally compliant special ed services, how are ARD meetings supposed to happen, what is supposed to happen in preparation for a meeting or in the meeting, who's supposed to be there. All of these things are completely unchanged for this format. The only area within special ed that has had some slight changes in terms of the rules is the rules around ARD amendments. And those have been broadened just a little so that there are some additional areas that are allowed to be handled in an IEP amendment now that don't require an ARD meeting. And that was done, you know, clearly to reduce the need for meetings. But those broadenings are actually, they're not significant in terms of covering area that are now going to surprise you as a parent or that you aren't prepared for. And of course, the other piece about an amendment ARD is if your school is saying, oh, we want to do this change and we're just going to do it by amendment, you can still, as a parent, of course, always request a meeting. And we've all had many Zoom meetings by now. You know, schools are having informal Zooms and formal ARD IEP meetings by Zoom. In the dispute resolution world, we're mediating by Zoom. Courts are having court hearings, you know, like on video platforms. And so so that slight change in the ARD amendment category is all there is, and it really it doesn't really change, it doesn't have to change your orientation as a parent in terms of, oh my gosh, now I need to learn something different about special ed law. Okay. The last two items within the rules are, and these already existed prior to the pandemic, are the concepts of compensatory services and how the options for dispute resolution. So I'm going to take the dispute resolution options first, because compensatory services is the one area that is much more front and center now that we're doing remote or hybrid instruction. And we're going to talk more at length about that one. But the traditional avenues, if parents have an issue, or if there's a problem with the school, the traditional avenues are call an ARD meeting. Parents can still have a resolution session. They can request mediation. The due process hearing process is all up and running. It's just modified to keep in-person gatherings to a minimum. So all of that remains unchanged. And then the concept of compensatory services, again, this existed before. Basically within IDEA, what that is IDEA says if a child has services that are written into that IEP, right, and we know that the IEP functions like a contract. So if it's in the IEP, the school has committed to providing it. If services in an IEP were not provided, then the child is entitled to receive services that compensate for those missing services after the fact. So as soon as we discover that some services haven't been implemented that are in the IEP, we can bring that to the school and basically have the school set up a plan to put those, not only put the services back so that they're now being provided the way the IEP says, but that they have to go back and find a different way, outside of the regular school day or, school service package to provide what was missing. So the classic example of this is the elementary school is short a speech therapist, and my child was supposed to have 15 weekly sessions over the course of a semester. And because there was no speech therapist for part of that time, my child only received 10 sessions. And so the school district needs to come back after the fact and make sure that my child gets those missing 5 sessions that he missed while they were down a speech therapist. That's the classic example. It's more, there's more creativity than that with more complicated compensatory services questions. So the replacement for services that aren't provided don't necessarily have to be that exact duplicate. Sometimes it makes the most sense to just put services in that didn't happen. So in the missing 5 sessions of speech therapy example, that's the case. I mean, that makes sense. It's easy. Everybody knows how to do that. It's just a scheduling issue. Maybe we're going to do that over summer or, in some other format. But the concept where if it's not clear cut like that, like it's some other type of service or it's a combination of services that weren't provided, and we don't know how to duplicate that on Saturday or in the summer, for example, then the other way we can look at compensatory services is to ask what services, now that we know there's been a gap, what services would, if provided, put that child in the position that they would have been in if the services had been in place all along. And if we can figure out services that will put the child on the road to being on the path where they would have been without the missing services, it's okay if the replacement services, the compensatory services, are totally different. They can have a different format. They can, there can be different components to them. And so the example going back to speech therapy is if that child's IEP goals for speech therapy were pragmatic language goals, right? So they were social skills goals, let's say, then it would be allowable to ask the question, okay, we can't hire an army of speech therapists now to provide all of the sessions that were missed during the pandemic, but if my child missed the sessions that were going to be working on social skills, and I now have some kind of a social skills group with a special educator or the school counselor or a lunch bunch, something like that, and we think that my child can work on similar goals and catch back up and make the right kind of progress to be where he would have been by by attending lunch bunch for social skills instead of getting 5 extra sessions of speech therapy. It's absolutely allowable to approach it that way and for the school to approach it that way. So the last piece about compensatory services, and again, this is all pre-pandemic, right? Nothing has changed yet in the way we're thinking about this stuff, is compensatory services, just like everything else about an IEP, are individual. So in that example that I just gave, I had to create an individualized example of the child whose speech goals were actually social skills, pragmatic language goals, right? Another child could have lots of articulation goals. Many students have a mixture of those things. So we know the rule, but how it plays out for your individual child or my individual child is always going to be very specific and individualized to that situation, to that individual kid. So that's the high level on compensatory services. The last piece about it is, what if services were provided, but the student just really dramatically did not make enough progress? That's another way into the conversation about compensatory services. That's harder than the first scenario where we can point to services that were written in the IEP that just didn't happen. That's easier. But the other way to think about it is, if the student didn't make adequate progress, then we can assume that something wasn't happening that needed to be happening. And so even if the school can show that they did everything that was in the IEP, and again, could be varying levels of skill or expertise, but if they can show that they did everything that was in the IEP, and we get to a point where the team can agree that, and whatever that was not meeting the child's needs enough to generate appropriate and adequate progress, then there might be a claim for compensatory services there as well. And that's much fuzzier, because it's not that services were promised and not provided, it's that there was a need that wasn't addressed, and so there was some mystery service in there that wasn't provided, but we can tell from the lack of progress that it was missing. So then the compensatory piece becomes more a project to figure out what the mystery service might have been, and okay, what can we put in place now that can move that student in the direction of where they might have been had that mystery service been provided. Okay, so those are the two ways in to compensatory services. Okay, the second R is reality. Okay, so we're doing 5 R's of navigating the pandemic and schools. The first R is know the rules. Second R is understand the reality. And that is right now and from the very beginning, schools are in an impossible situation, because as soon as it became clear that they were not going to be able to open doors and people were going to be home past the normal crisis time that we knew to plan for, having kids learning remotely, teachers teaching from afar, kids with disabilities who have all these additional services that are that much harder to implement, or without them, it's that much harder for that child to access, the educational services that are still there. From the beginning, it was clear that what is written in the IEPs of America right now can't possibly be implemented under these conditions. And so when you think about that from the perspective of the schools, that's a terrible problem, right? To know that, oh my gosh, there's no way we are not going to be able to provide all of the services in all these IEPs, let alone measure progress and ask those harder questions about, is it enough? Is it fine-tuned enough? Is it individualized enough? And so, you can imagine the panic that has been happening among educators since the beginning, back in March. So at the same time, because the law doesn't tell us what to do in this situation, what happened at the government level, almost really from the beginning, this started in early March, even before states were really locking down, the U.S. Department of Education and the state education agencies, so ours is TEA, the Texas Education Agency, together started issuing guidance. And that guidance basically was attempting to say, okay, we don't have a rule for this, so we're going to issue guidance, and schools, this is what we're encouraging you to follow. And that's all the schools had. So the main guidance, and there's been a lot that has come out, in different increments over the last 6 months, but the main themes in the guidance, both at the state and federal level, has been two things. One is an acknowledgement that the rules are all the same. We're not changing any rules. And then two, because we know services are not going to be provided, there are going to be missing services for every kid with an IEP. The part of the rule that does exist that we know we're going to lean on is compensatory services. So A, the rules aren't changing. B, we know that schools aren't going to be able to implement complete IEPs. C, the answer to that in the traditional structure is, okay, once we get to the end of that, we're going to look back, we're going to look at all the services that weren't provided, or we're going to look at a child's progress and ask ourselves, what would possibly put the student back on track to be where they would have been had the services been provided. And we're going to address those missing services and that missing progress through the compensatory services system. And that makes sense given the current law. That also creates a panic for the world of educators, because what that does is it basically has, state and federal government saying, okay, schools, we're not changing any rules, and we totally get it that you're not going to be able to provide all the services that are in these IEPs. And at the same time, we're just going to use compensatory services to pay it all back after the fact. Well, even if once we get to a point where we're solidly back in in-person traditional going to school every day instruction, and that's not close, I don't think, but hopefully sometime in 2021, we're hoping we're going to really get to that solid place again. for the schools to look back at wherever that endpoint is and wind the clock all the way back to March of 2020 and then start trying to put it back, that too is probably an impossible task. So our educators are still panicking. The thing that the government guidance has also given them is they have said, we expect, so we're basically going to push the problem off into the future for the schools, right? For the parents, it's a problem today. And that's what we talked about earlier on, right? Missing all of the structure, missing the day-to-day right now services. Like that's a problem today, and it's building and having all kinds of domino effects for families. For the schools, saying the rules are frozen and we're going to let it be compensatory services allows the schools to do their best right now, but basically push the problem off into the future. And so the standard that has been set for the schools is for them to be making good faith efforts. And basically what that means is what government has said is good faith effort on the part of the school is defined as ongoing meaningful communication with parents, collaboration with parents, and responsiveness to that conversation and collaboration and the moving target that they knew from the beginning was going to happen. So what that looks like is when the schools in the spring all started sending out those reduced services letters, that was predictable, right? So they sent letters to the parent community saying, we can't implement your child's IEP the way it's written. This is the way, this is what we know we do have access to. You're going to be at home. We're going to be relying on technology. Mom and dad, you're the main implementers and support people at home. And we have isolated, these top 3 areas as the priority areas to keep working on in your child's IEP, or these are the 3 areas that we have the ability to work on remotely. And so that's how we've chosen the fewer things that we're going to be working on remotely with your child, right? So that's what that initial wave of communication was. Now, the good faith standard on how the school is supposed to be operating also includes not just communication to the parents, but really collaboration with. So that concept is supposed to also include a question to the parents, and that is, out of this whole IEP that we know we can't implement fully, what are your priority areas? If we can only work on 25%, what are your top 25%? Or knowing your school, your child, and your technology at home, and your work schedule and siblings and all of the individual things that make every family, individually set up to cope with this. Given all of those factors, what are the top priority items that are going to work if we work on them together, right? So that whole conversation is really meant and intended to be very collaborative. And then the responsiveness piece, in addition to that, is after that ideal best effort, good faith effort conversation has happened, is that then we try it, we roll it out, we experiment with it, and the parents and the school are still in ongoing communication because they're monitoring how's it going, right? And the how is it going question is meant to happen over and over again as long as families are at home doing virtual instruction. And the how's it going question is meant to inform what we do next. So maybe we thought we chose the top 3 items that we were going to be successful working on remotely, and then we discovered absolutely not. Yes, those are the things that are most important to me, to us, to to whomever. but we can't get that done. Or maybe we discover something different where, wow, we really hoped for that one and we thought we weren't going to be able to get it done, but my child had this surprising response to being able to do this in front of a computer instead of in a classroom. And now that we're learning this new skill set or aptitude that we thought was going to be a problem, but it's turned out to be a strength, let's revisit the IEP and see, well, what else could we load into that format, right? And so you can see how this comment on the earlier slide about the learning curve, the role of mistakes and the learning curve, is that this is an intense development and experimentation time. And there are things that are absolutely going to fall apart and already have, and other things that will work surprisingly well. And all of that is just, it's developing fast. So ideally, this is the guidance that we're getting. It's all about the communication and the collaboration and the willingness to maybe keep shifting to try to get the most out of that IEP given the limitations of the circumstances. So now, and this is our first green star, what the pandemic is teaching us about FAPE. Now, remember, FAPE is the standard for what an appropriate special education program is supposed to be delivered, and that's a free, appropriate public education, which means it is individually tailored to your child. It is addressing the student as a whole person, so not just emphasizing academics or behavior or functional skills. It's the whole child, and it has its attention on the least restrictive environment, and adequate progress can come from that. And not only adequate progress, but adequate progress that is the result of an appropriately ambitious special ed program that's been designed for your child. That's the regular standard for is a special ed plan basically compliant? If it can meet that standard, the answer is yes. So the question is now, well, if we know that schools are barely implementing IEPs, and a lot of them are making really good creative efforts, but it's not the whole thing that's written in all these IEPs, and progress is weird, and limited, and for a lot of kids there's regression. All of those markers, if we hold it up to the traditional FAPE measurement and we're asking what is supposed to come from this IEP the way it's written, right? Because the guidance has told us we're using all the same standards, then obviously, again, the next conclusion is going to be that no child is making the right amount of progress in, enough in the breadth of areas that IEPs are meant to address. And so the gamble that schools are making about how this is going to play out is, because again, this is the third terror area for our educators, and that is, first, we have no idea how we're going to implement these IEPs. Second, compensatory services, if we really look at that in a traditional way, that's fine, but it's going to crush us when it finally happens. And then third, what if, even with all of our best efforts and our good faith collaboration, communication, we're doing our best, we're coming online as fast as we can, we're getting kids back into school as soon as we can and as safely. If all of that, we look back on this period of time and conclude that children universally didn't have FAPE, then that also sets schools up for huge liability in the world of litigation and lawsuits. And So that's the third area of, wow, like, you know, from an educator's perspective, how much more set up for failure can we be? So the gamble that they're making right now is that because all kids' educational services have been reduced, that if special ed services have also been reduced in the same way or the same proportion, but not below that, the everybody number, what they're hoping is that the courts, because there will be lawsuits, there are already lawsuits that are starting to happen, they're hoping that the courts are going to look at them having used good faith efforts to reduce special ed services and success, but to keep it level with the overall reduction in services and success for all kids. They're hoping that the courts are going to consider FAPE to have been met, right? Even in that proportional reduction. Now, and we don't know if that's going to turn out to be, you know, the law of the land or the different rulings in different parts of the country, but that's where, for sure, where Texas schools are sort of hanging their hat right now in terms of their strategies. So in terms of new law, we talked about litigation. There are court cases that are just now starting to pop up, more in the Northeast than other parts of the country. But those court cases, as they, you know, work towards resolution, we're going to start getting some answers to these questions about, well, what is FAPE and what is good faith and what is enough collaboration and communication, and, you know, what do compensatory services look like? Some of those answers are going to start to come out of these court cases. And at the same time, up to this point, the guidance has been clear that IDEA and Section 504 are meant to remain the way they have been. But Congress has been considering, and they've been going through the hearing process off and on since April, asking questions about parts of IDEA that maybe they should consider waiving in order to provide some relief to the schools who right now are in this impossible situation. Up to this point, parent advocacy organizations and you know, different people who have come to testify at these hearings, and the education community, and the U.S. Department of Education has, up to this point, sort of maintained that, okay, we can't cut into IDEA in order to provide that relief valve for the situation, because, you know, that if we reduce the expectations and requirements that we have from schools, really we're creating relief by giving away rights that students with disabilities currently have. So that has been the perspective right now, but Congress is continuing to look at that. So just from an advocacy perspective, it's worth keeping an eye out, keeping an ear out, watching those articles as they come by to see what's happening with that. And surely if changes to IDEA are made by Congress, that too will set off another wave of litigation, you know, that will question those changes. But all of that is a lengthy process. And so as long as Congress can hold steady and not cut into IDEA before we get to a point where we're largely getting back into the swing of things, then you know, we're left with this puzzle of a problem, which is, for schools, how do we pay it back? And for families, you know, how do we rescue progress and limit regression and stimulate growth and access to opportunities while we're going through this really unusual time. Okay, the third R, rhythm. So rhythm is, we've talked a lot about that, the collaboration, communication, good faith effort standard. And that's a requirement that is on the schools, right? So the legal guidance doesn't tell parents or families anything about what they have to do. It only tells the schools what they have to do. But realistically, the schools can't engage in that collaboration without parent partners on the other side, because if there's nobody to collaborate with, there's no collaboration. The other point is, of course, as parents, this is a way, if we're going to continue to have our kids benefit from what's in their IEP or parts of their IEP or the new format, things that we didn't expect that are positive from all the remote learning, the only way to do that, of course, is to really dig in and sort of apply that good faith standard to ourselves, in addition to the schools. So as a strategy, as parents, what we want to be doing is we also want to be engaging in that same kind of communication, asking for the collaboration. If our school partners aren't doing that, absolutely we want to be doing that. Of course, to the extent that we have bandwidth to do that, right? Because, back to the R of reality, the family reality and the economic reality of all of this means that we're not just all able to jump in and be that superstar parent partner to our educators either. So all of this is said with just the caveat of, within the world of what's reasonable on any given day. But this is the goal. And so the other thing that's really important to be doing with your educators, and as you're trying to play your role as the in-home support person, whatever that needs to look like in your individual family, is you want to figure out some kind of method of keeping snapshots of your child. And those snapshots can look like whatever makes sense for you. Some people have a notebook where they're, every few days they're just writing down, their impressions, like a journal entry about, any progress that their children are making, or how they're, connecting with classmates over Zoom, or anything. It could look like just dedicating one day a week. So, okay, on Saturday mornings, I am gonna dedicate 1 cup of coffee to sitting by myself and reflecting on my child's week in school, and I'm gonna jot down notes, right? So I'm seeing this progress, or I'm worried about this regression, or we experimented with this set of IEP goals and it didn't work, and I want to shift to a different priority in the IEP, right? Whatever that thing might be, you want to capture it somehow, because that is going to become the foundation for what you ask for when it comes time to have the compensatory services conversation with the school. So if there's no parent picture, when we get to that point, if the parent can't articulate, this is my version of what I think my kid lost, then it's going to be left to the school to decide what they're going to address and how they're going to address compensatory services when that happens. The last note about compensatory services is we don't have to wait. You don't have to just keep a running list from now till next May or February or October or whenever it happens that we're ready to have the big compensatory services conversation. If something is occurring to you now, bring it up now, put it in the dialogue now, make notes about it now. Because again, in this sort of rolling learning environment that we're in together with our educators, there might be things that your school can put in place in terms of something that's compensatory right now, given the resources that we have. And that's a way to take a gap that we're watching start and stop it from becoming a bigger gap. So, okay, thank you. So that's our rhythm R. Okay. The fourth R. Parents are still right about what their kid needs. In the end, as parents, even if we don't know, we're lay people, we don't have access to all the educational, technology, methodology, all of it. We still know our child inside and out in a way that our educators, even the best, most dedicated, loving professionals can't know. And so, again, if something new comes up, parents are often the first to identify it, and that's okay. Parents sometimes experience frustration, when they're the first to see something happening and they bring it up, and professionals then respond with, "Oh, I didn't see that," or I still don't see it, or, like being the first to find something makes sense on the one hand, because we know our kids like nobody else does, and on the other hand, um, sometimes parents wonder, well, why didn't you see it, right? But all that by way of saying that is a natural part of the process, and so you may be the first person who has to put some of this stuff on the table, and that's okay. The other thing is that individualization piece remains important throughout. And so, what we don't want to see really in the end is cookie cutter solutions to compensatory services, right? So all the kids who miss speech are now going to get this one program. Well, again, like we talked about, the great diversity of just speech goals and what that might look like. And so if everybody had individualized needs to begin with, then we don't want to see a cookie cutter solution in the end. And at the same time, from a parent strategy point of view, just because our neighbor's kid is receiving something or doing something doesn't necessarily mean that, okay, the school's capable, therefore my kid should have that. If you want to make an argument for something that your neighbor's kid has access to, that argument has to come through the lens of my child's individual needs, right? So I know it's possible for you to do this because my neighbor tells me that you're doing it. And based on my child's individual profile, I know that this is a fit, right? So that's the second step in order to advocate for something that you know exists but maybe hasn't been offered to your child. Okay, and the last R is to remember that this is complicated. And what that means is lots of things that seem like they don't fit together can and are happening simultaneously together. So, for example, it is okay and expected to feel anxious or angry or, any number of uncomfortable, feelings or postures, adversarial, and to also be working at the same time in good faith with the school and keeping your snapshot records for that future compensatory services conversation. It is possible to help your child get as much as they can from this situation, whatever it is, even if it's limited, and to also be gathering information that you need for that later conversation. It is possible to have compassion for the educators and the other people around that table who are also doing their best and not knowing how to do it, and balancing work and family and economics and everything that we're all balancing, and to also remain a strong advocate And the last thing, and probably the most important thing, there should be a green star on that. There is a green star, but it moved somehow. Taking care of yourself can and needs to happen while taking care of your child and your family, because they can't get through any of this if you're out of commission. And as much as parents want to be that driving force and the help and the solution and the advocate and everything all at once, taking time out and making space just for our own personal recharge, whatever that might look like, that's a necessity. That is not a luxury. So I know you've all heard that. We all say that to each other all the time. It's part of the parent code, but I think it's really important to say it again in this situation. Okay, so, oops, I'm sorry. All right, so we have a few minutes for questions. Cindy, how do we want to do it?
We do. I think if you take your screen down, and if people have questions, because it's a small enough group, if you have a question, raise your hand and we'll let you have the floor. How about that? Okay, does anybody have any questions? How's school going so far? I guess I'm curious about for families. How is school going?
Okay, we do have we have anything in the chat?
No, somebody was asking for your address or your contact information, which I did go ahead and put in the chat box.
Okay. Yes, you guys call or email me later if you need to, but yes.
Okay, you're on. Perla?
Okay, hi, good afternoon to everybody. My name is Perla. My son got to North ISD district. He have a IEP plan and everything. He's visually impaired. So it's a little bit more complicated for us because he doesn't know like the technology and nothing like that. So I asked the district if they can provide me like a training or something to help my son. And they tell me like at this time it's impossible because we decide to keep my son at home. Like it's something like a parent decision. So they offer me to send my son to the school, but he's medical fragile too. He have a lot of medical condition, and the reason we prefer to keep at home is, I'm sorry, I hear the translator at the same time, so sorry.
That's okay, you're doing great.
And the reason we keep at home because we have a letter from his doctor, and I shared that letter with the school and everything, and the doctor said you need to keep it at home as much as we can. So I'm agreeing with the doctor, and I send the letter again, and I send an email all the time. I send emails and everything, and then when we have the IEP meeting, they tell me that, and they put on the part of the like what we're talking about and everything. I forgot the name right now. Sorry.
The deliberations.
Thank you. The deliberation, and then it's take my attention because they automatic put agree. They mark agree for me, and then it's like it's take my, and I say I'm when I talk to the district on the meeting, I let us know I'm not agree with that because I told you, and I post the picture from the letter I have from the doctor and everything. But when they send me which table they are, we have like 4 hours since school start. We have advocates, we have everything. So all the time, they already discriminate my son in one class. He have bullying in one class too. So we document everything in emails, and when we have the art, they just put agree for me. And it's like, but I'm not agree with you. Why you put that? So I have like many questions. It's okay if the district doesn't want to offer me any training because I'm the person who worked with him. And also like, why they automatic put agree for me?
Okay, there's a lot in there. So a couple, I'm going to take some of those issues out of order. So first of all, remember, all of the rules are the same, right? So when it comes to checking agree for you, they couldn't do that before, they can't do that now. And what that means is you have the right to attach, you have the right to send your own statement in and request that that be uploaded into the IEP software so that that becomes a part of your child's ARD. The other thing is I would call another ARD immediately in order to say I didn't agree to that, right? And then also like to be able to talk about more like these other issues. So getting on to the other issues, so with respect to your child being medically fragile and having a visual impairment that admittedly, I'm sure the school doesn't know how to approach that remotely because your child doesn't have can't sit in front of a screen all day. That situation is okay, but let's think about the framework that we just talked about. They need to be, the standard is the good faith standard.
I'm sorry.
That's okay. So what they need to be doing is not saying, no, we just can't do that. They need to be saying, exploring with you the creative options for how, right? So when you say, if you can offer me some training so that I can support my child at home, that's a good example of a creative solution that they could provide in order to make that situation work. And if they don't like that solution, or that's not feasible for them to provide, then in that communication collaboration model, they need to be coming up with a different suggestion for that. Okay, so the fact that that's not happening, you want to be documenting that, even if it's just making notes, because again, eventually when we get to compensatory services, the fact that, the first question that we're going to ask is, okay, did the school at least follow the good faith standard, right? Did they do their best with what they had? Did they stay in communication with the parent? Did they try different things, even if it was just a little bit, right? And if the answer to that question is yes, and we later find out that the law develops in a way that says, and that equals FAPE, then the school is going to be almost off the hook for having to provide a big compensatory services, offer at the end. And so if the school is not acting in good faith now by kind of the description that we outlined, that's really important information for you for later for compensatory services when they finally become available. So that's the next thing. And then the third thing is the fact that your child is medically fragile is basically, it puts your child in the position of having to choose between health and education, right? And unless they are asking all kids to make that choice, they can't just ask kids with disabilities to make that choice, because then that is discriminatory based on disability, right? So if they were saying to the entire school, we have nothing to provide at home, therefore you all have to come back. And if they then said, to the other kids with health conditions or families with health conditions, or whatever, so that, to the other families with or without disability, the other families who were saying, because of COVID, I don't want my child to go back yet. If the school then said to that family, well, you have to choose between education and health, then, now that would not be okay, right? But
Mhm.
then when they put your kid in that situation, that they wouldn't be discriminating. They would be treating everybody equally poorly, right? But what they're doing in this situation by telling most of the school population, no, you don't have to choose between your education and your health. We're going to figure out how to balance that with you. But, in your situation, in a specialized situation that's all about disability or medical condition, they're saying, no, for you can only have one or the other. That's also, I mean, like that's a discriminatory position that they're in as well. And so all of that is going to feed into your compensatory services argument, and also your argument now today, right? Because all of that, like that's another violation of the rules that currently exist. And so, all of those things, like those things shouldn't wait for compensatory services. Those are things that you can and should be addressing in an ARD meeting or beyond, right here and now. Does that help?
Yes, and also when we're talking about to attach a file to the art,
Mm-hmm.
that's something we ask all the time, because after or before any meetings, like before the meetings, I make my agenda, I make my question, my suggestions, like a pattern, what I think maybe help my son. And then when I send before, and then when we finish the art, I say like, okay, this is my opinion about the art, and this is what I think about the art. So can you attach? And they never want to attach to the art. They put it like, but they just put it like in a paper and that's it. But they don't put like nothing like, okay, we attach a document or nothing like that. So they just send me an email like, we received your document, and that's it. What I can do to attach that document, like I many times ask if they can put like in the deliberations, like mom saying a document and we attach to the art, and that's it. But they don't want to do that.
So this is a little more of an extended question, but the high level on that is, I would not accept that answer. Like I would, my strategy would be to ask why, like what is it about that? Because we know that you have the ability from a technology perspective. We know that other schools and districts do that all the time. We know it's possible, we know it's required, and then the legal argument of that is, as parents, we have the right to meaningful participation in the process. And if you can't have your contribution documented, how do we know that you have had the opportunity to participate meaningfully? And so sort of the more aggressive side of that argument is, school, it's in your interest to attach my input into the document, because you're just strengthening my argument for lack of meaningful participation by not documenting the participation that I'm trying to have, right? And so sort of the implicit legal argument in that is, this is going to come back to bite you. And of course, rather than just being aggressive in your meeting with that kind of an argument, the way I like to handle that is keep going up the chain of command. If the people on your team can't have that conversation with you, find a special ed coordinator, or find the school principal, or go to the special ed director, right? Just keep moving up in administration until you get to a level where somebody in administration wants to follow the law. Because I guarantee you there's somebody up there who does not want you to file that lawsuit because their team was stubborn about not wanting to put your comments in the deliberations.
Like, for example, in the arts, we have a director from special education. He's in the middle school now. So we have a special who's on chair for middle school too. We have a representative from the district. We have the person who's in chair of the BI and O&Ms and everything. And it take me like my attention, like why, and when the only person who doesn't participate in the art is the principal, because we have all these persons. And I don't know, maybe that's the reason maybe the principal doesn't know what's happening in the art, or I don't know what's happened now, because like it's take my attention, like we have too many people in the art, like 31 people in just one art. It's too many people, like maybe that's and also we have some translate, because I speak a little bit, and I can understand everything, but I speak just a little bit. I don't know, maybe it's like a little bit confusion or something's happened between the arts, or I'm not sure.
So if you have the special ed director in there, I would be interacting with that person.
Okay.
And just direct your questions to that person, and also keep coming to that person saying, this is my understanding of the law and how it's supposed to happen. Am I confused? Help me understand. Like what is your perspective on the legal requirements that you're trying to follow, that you're coaching your team to follow, right? So if you keep coming from that perspective of, hey, help me out here. Like you're here to help my kid, right? I know that if you're here, I know that you know the legal requirements. I think I'm only asking to just follow the law. That seems like something that we have in common. So am I wrong? Like, what's up with that, right? So that's how I would approach that. And before we go on, I want to make sure if there are other people who want to throw a question in there, I can stick around, but I know other people maybe have only allocated till 3. So,
okay. So
thank you. I'm sorry. Thanks for taking 2 minutes.
No worries.
You're welcome.
We have another question from Maria, I think. I think she's raising her hand. She's real dark. She looks like you're in the dark, but Maria, do you want to go ahead and unmute and you can ask your question?
Yes, I have this question. In 2016, I had requested a full and individual evaluation for my child. They did give me a full evaluation, but only in the area of speech. Okay, I was new on all this process, and because she was at or above level during kindergarten, they say she was not eligible. As year passed, it has come to my knowledge and school's knowledge that she's not passing the grades. She's below reading and below math. Okay, so here we go, back and forth, school and doctor. And the doctor had given me a Vanderbilt scale for ADHD and an ADOS observation for autism. And we have a meeting at the school on January, and they just wanted me to give me like an evaluation for ADHD. And I asked the question, if you are going to evaluate my child, would that include a speech? They say no. And from that point, all observation that the school is doing is telling me that she's very sociable. Yes, she's sociable, but when something very strong happens to her, either good or bad, she won't talk at the right moment. She would tell me like 1 week, 2 or 3 in a place like at the park or somewhere else. And I'm talking about serious issue, not that a kid, pull my hair or something. One time she went to the hospital, another time it has come to issue. Now, at the meeting right there, the people was saying me, okay, yes or no, you want this, yes or no. At that point, I felt very pressure to answer yes or no. and I couldn't answer, because if she was pressing both of her hands on the desk, trying to pressure me, for me, it was like a very sublime aggression. Like, you're pressuring me. I'm like, okay, wait a minute, I need to leave. I requested to leave for a moment, and then I came back and I couldn't answer. Now, my question is, can the child be a full evaluation, not just what they want for ADHD?
The short answer to that is yes. So the law says that schools are required to evaluate in all areas of suspected disability. And the school is not the only one who gets to decide what the suspected areas of disability are, right? So the school doesn't get to decide, we only have concerns about ADHD, so we're only evaluating for ADHD. As the parent, you're allowed to bring, your other concerns, and you have great outside data for that, because you have a private ADHD eval, you have a private ADOS, you have academic grades that are now lower than where they should be. So arguably, I think, you're not just the emotional mama who's coming raising her hand saying something's wrong. You have data, right? Like, to suspect that there is something in the attentional world, there is something maybe in the autism spectrum world. There's clearly a communication piece, right, which is all about speech and language. You now have academic concerns. And so as the parent in the equation, you're allowed to introduce all of those areas of suspected disability, even if the school doesn't have that suspicion, or if they say that they don't have that suspicion. The other piece is that the timing, if the original FIE, which was only speech anyway, was in 2016, it's been years. It's 2020 now, and she's a different child. I mean, they absolutely can and should reevaluate, over time, and special ed requires that for kids who do have an IEP. They have to have a full reevaluation every 3 years. And it's allowable to do it even sooner, depending on what the needs in the situation are. So, the short answer is yes. They should be able to do. They are obligated to do a more thorough evaluation now, given all the data in the situation.
And what would that evaluation look like now during COVID?
Great question. So what I'm understanding from schools is, to the extent that they can meet face-to-face, they are doing that. They are trying to address all the kids in the evaluation pipeline who have been in that pipeline since March. So I am certain that there are delays. They're contrary to what we think, there aren't very many formal timelines about evaluation. The only one that you can really count on is after a parent has signed consent for the school to do an evaluation, the school has 45 school days in which to complete that. So that's 9 weeks of school days. So if you sign consent on May 1st, then, and there are 4 more weeks of school in May, and school starts in August, that FIE might not be due until late September or early October. So it can still be a long time even within that one limit. And that one limit only applies to an initial evaluation. It doesn't apply to a child who is already eligible with an IEP and we're requesting another evaluation of some sort, because maybe we have a new need, or, we're trying to figure something else out. So, there aren't, the biggest problem right now is the delay. And so even on that 45-day limit, schools are out of compliance on that one too, because even for the kids where it's clear cut, yes, everybody wants the evaluation. Everybody's agreeing about the extent of the evaluation. Mom or dad has signed consent. The evaluators are ready to go. They want to do this. So those are the best case scenario situations. Those situations are all delayed because of limited ability to be in person for testing.
And then what do you recommend to parents so we have some parents that we work with that their kids are thriving. Online school, they're doing great. We have others that they can't even get their child to participate in on any kind of online platform. What do you recommend to those parents that, we know the parents are frustrated because they feel like their child's just falling further and further behind? Is that document? Can the school, if the school's taking attendance via Zoom, can they count that against the parent, like against the child? Because they're offering them online, but the parents aren't able to help them be engaged. Are the parents going to get in any kind of attendance trouble for that? Did that make sense?
It did. So I think this is similar to Perla, who has a kid with a visual impairment and, just can't, this format is just a non-starter. And, there are lots of students out there who don't have visual impairments, but this format is just not the format. So what I fall back on is access. And so what the schools are obligated to do. So again, let's look back at what the schools are doing for everybody. For every kid out there, the schools are offering some access and some educational programming. And so what that means is if a kid with a disability can't access school the way it's being offered because of their disability, the school is not allowed to say, okay, sorry, right? I mean, that is the same as the classic example of, the person in a wheelchair who is qualified to be inside the building, but can't get in because there's no curb cut, right? The school has to make the curb cut to let the kid in. And if they refuse to do it simply because they don't know how, that has a discriminatory impact on people who can't, this is just a version of a curb, this format, right? And so for a school to say, sorry, we're just not, either you get your wheelchair up this curb without a ramp or don't come, that's just classic disability discrimination. And I would highlight that in the conversation. And at the same time, recognizing that magic is not going to happen in this period, to be documenting.
So I think
and make the documentation easy on parents. It does not have to be formal. It doesn't have to be pages and pages. Just make it regular. Like if there's a really bad thing that you absolutely need to write it down. Otherwise, just do it regularly. Keep a variety of types of information, like what is my kid's mood and behavior looking like one day. Another day it might be their academic progress or regression. Another day it might be how they're interacting with instructional materials or technology. Because over time all of that is it's going to paint the picture. And then also that other topic of collaboration, communication. Are they working with me? Are we doing the dance in order to make something happen as best we can? because that part is going to be key.
Okay. And then is it possible that compensatory services could be an extension of whether the child repeat a grade, or if they're in a transition program and they're not able to access the services because they're out in the community? We know that the hard and fast rule is 22, that they're aging out. Has there been any kind of guidance that has changed that time frame, as well as, is it possible? I guess that was two questions. Is it possible to repeat a grade?
So repeating a grade is a tool that could be used in order to create whatever that best case scenario is. I think it's more complicated than, I don't think you would award repeating a grade as compensatory, because especially for special ed services, you know, if that student is going to have access to transition services at the back end, we're not giving them, we're not paying them back on top of what they have. We're taking a year away at the end, right, by doing a repeat earlier. So that might be a good strategy, but I would hesitate to put that in compensatory services format. With respect to extending transition services, there are some states in the Northeast who have already done that in response to lawsuits. And so, so we're seeing it in other parts of the country, you know, where they've said, okay, everybody who is aging out, you know, from this date to this date is going to get another year or another semester, or, you know, and so we're seeing some movement that way. I haven't heard of any of that in Texas yet.
Okay, cool. Okay, we only have a couple of minutes left. Thank you, everybody, for sticking with us. We can take one more question. If we have one more question, we can take that. We appreciate your time, Carolyn. Wonderful information. You're always so great at giving us very clear, precise information that we know is changing.
It is
right?
changing.
It's still changing. It's like, once you think you know, it changes the next time. Okay. Doesn't look like we have any other questions. We will be sending evaluations out, so please watch for those, and we appreciate your feedback. Carolyn, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, everybody, for being here.
Yes, thank you, everybody, for being here. Everybody stay safe out there, and we hope to see you at a upcoming Zoom call. Okay, bye, everybody.
Thanks,
Thank
everybody.
you.